let's reflect on two things: obfuscation and exaggeration. When I see brew guides, I understand that they're made to help someone, but I have a sinking suspicion that these could be having the opposite effect. Instead, erecting barriers to entry by unintentionally making something sound more difficult than it really is or needs to be. I'll even go a step further and assert that there is some level of intentional complication added in from some groups in an attempt to keep the audience or customer in a position of subservience because coffee is hard and someone needs to feel important. Superlative flavor clarity, balance, and sweetness, all in your end cup. What if you could get this with such little time, thought, and effort that you may think it won't work? Well, all of this is possible and within reach for you at home. So let's dive in. The Aeropress, both hated and loved by many. The number one complaint seems to be regarding the resultant cup. Thick, oily, potentially with sediment and a high TDS, all very valid reasons to not like this brewer. So we are going to minimize and potentially eliminate these downsides while making this easier to brew with than ever before. We're aiming to mimic two things: the Clover brewer and cuppings. But before we talk about why, let's gather our tools. Using the Aeropress, the Prismo attachment from Fellow, and paper filters. The Clover brewer has long been my gold standard for flavor separation and clarity. You're able to taste all aspects of the bean in a way that brewed coffee rarely achieves. The basic pitch is you're quickly filling the chamber with water, getting everything wet immediately, and then just doing nothing. Now, when you see this clip from a few years ago, you'll notice that there isn't intense stirring. Rather, you are folding the grounds into the incoming jet of water in an attempt to saturate everything evenly. But simply, there is much less agitation from stirring than you'd think. After a relatively short steep and contact time of about a minute, a piston lifts up, filtering out the brew from beneath the crust, exiting into the chamber below. What we're going to do is mimic this, just using pressure above when plunging. Prismo is going to allow us to keep all of the liquid together in the chamber, and the rubber rim of the included filter is going to allow the paper filter to be more secure and not allow oil and particulate to escape into the cup. I've settled on 2 minutes as a good starting point for this. Clover is using about a minute for their contact time, but it's a much wider chamber than the Aeropress. Can you go longer? Sure, take a look at cuppings. Can have a very long steep without really messing it up. So, what does this method really do to minimize the Aeropress downsides? We're avoiding unnecessary agitation and variance. Don't rinse the paper filter, you'll be fine. We don't want any coffee sticking to the filter. We're not going to stir the slurry. Rather, since we're controlling our water pouring, we're just going to use a fast, circular pour to ensure everything gets wet. You're almost instantaneously going to saturate all of the grounds, which will then form a crust at the top of the brew. So the basic recipe, which can be used as a starting point, is simple: a 1:14 ratio, 15 grams of ground coffee to 210 grams of water, grinding somewhere between the coarse end of espresso range to a single cup V60. It's going to be different depending on your grinder at home. If it's too astringent, coarsen your grind. If you want more strength, grind finer or steep longer. To review to make sure we're all on the same page. We're only agitating the coffee really once, maybe twice. The first is whenever we're pouring the water in, and the second is just whenever we're, getting the brew liquid out into your cup. So those are the only two times that we're actively influencing the brew. I was looking over at the 2016 edition of the World Aeropress Championship. It has this big, thick volume of all of the recipes from the World Aeropress Championship that year. And I'm looking through some of these just baffled as to the amount of excessive steps that people are taking to get a cup that they find is delicious. To be clear, this recipe that I kind of stumbled upon was almost done as a joke, a reaction to looking at this, thinking, well, what's the least amount of work that I can do to produce a stellar cup? And the irony is, these have been more delicious than Aeropress brews I've had for years. The transparent flavor, the lack of grit, the minimized astringency, thickness, all the things that people end up not liking about either immersion or Aeropress brews, it all went out the window, and I finally found myself in a place where I'm really enjoying using this brewer again. So I would ask it to you. Try out the recipe. Let me know in the comments what you think. Again, this is just a framework. I don't expect that it will work for everyone. Remember, different grinders are going to be able to get to different levels of strength and extraction. And the one thing this recipe doesn't really solve is the high TDS. And all of the cups that I keep getting from this, they're somewhere between 1.5 and 1.6%, which is fairly strong and not for everyone. However, I think that the absence of the sediment and the excessive oils that an Aeropress cup normally can have, I think makes the higher TDS quite a bit more palatable. You may not actually think it's that strong. So, give it a shot. Maybe don't read this book unless you want a good laugh. Just to give you a sense of what some of the recipes are. Okay, here's one I've flipped to. Just to give you a sense of, I guess, what spurred this whole thought. Here's a method. Step 1. Bloom with 30 grams of water at 85 degrees Celsius. 2. Stir 4 times and bloom for 30 seconds. 3. Then we're going to pour 195 grams at 85 degrees Celsius water for 50 seconds. We're then going to let it steep for a minute and 30 seconds, and then we're going to do a 30-second drain. So look at all of the different steps that we're cutting out. Try it maybe with your other brewing devices that you have at home. How much can you strip out and still succeed with? And in the chance of this, does it actually make it better? I'm curious to know. I haven't tried this methodology with other brewers yet, but I'm eager to see what you find. I'd also like to give a massive shout out to Mitchell at Heritage Coffee in Waco, Texas. He was able to, in using this technique, identify this fantastic way to remove the ground coffee and filter at the end. Just pull back on the piston before removing the cap, and it sucks the filter back off, so you can remove the Prismo attachment and not have it covered with the paper filter and grounds, making for an easy cleanup. Thanks for sticking along. Don't forget to like the video, subscribe, share to your friends, and continue on the journey with us. Cheers.